Welcome, everybody. It's 1 minute past 5, and I'm assuming everybody's arrived for the session, which is great. Welcome. Great to have you all here. Today, we're looking for big, innovative ideas to address the challenges of the fashion industry. My name is Gordon Renouf, and I'm the founder of Good On You, one of the world's most comprehensive sources for sustainability ratings for fashion brands. And I have 4 really interesting experts with me today to help us look for those big innovative ideas that will increase sustainability and otherwise address challenges facing the fashion industry. So first bit of housekeeping, there is the ability to ask questions, as I'm sure you know, or make comments. You can put them in the session tab of Hopin, and we'll be watching them as we go through the session. And when they're relevant to what we're talking about, we might bring them in. I will raise the issues that you note in the session as appropriate. And indeed, our panelists may pick up on your questions as well as they address the issues that they want to talk about. So we're going to start by asking each panelist to identify what they think is the most important challenge facing fashion. And later we'll move through the session to talk about the degree to which the industry has made progress on sustainability over the last 10 or so years. And finally, we'll move to the big innovative ideas that people have to address sustainability in fashion. So I'm going to go to each of the panelists in turn, ask them to introduce themselves briefly and just touch on quickly one of the challenges that they think is very important for the fashion industry. And I might start with you, Flora, if you'd like to go first and tell me who you are, tell our audience who you are, and what you think is the number one challenge that you'd like to talk about today.
Yeah, so I'm Flora, co-founder of Supply Compass, and we are a production platform for fashion brands and manufacturers. And we are on a mission to make sustainable sourcing and production accessible and cost-effective for all through technology and a collaborative ecosystem network. So, I mean, I'm probably going to pick the kind of key challenge really today for me is the lack of technological innovation in the areas that matter most in the fashion industry, and that is within the supply chain. There has been so much innovation and exciting tools that have been created for the end consumer, but really the kind of entire value chain has been too often left out of the focus of innovation. So that means kind of capturing, sharing, and analysis of data right back to the raw material source. So yeah, that's my key challenge. Oh, I think you're on mute, Gordon.
I said fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Good to get the challenges out in a nice, succinct way. So the lack of technical innovation in the supply chain. Baptiste, I'm going to move to you now. Please introduce yourself and pick on your challenge.
Thank you, Gordon, and good morning, everybody. So Baptiste here, Baptiste Carriere-Pradal, chair of the Policy Hub, which is a joint effort by the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, the Global Fashion Agenda, and FESI, the European Footwear and Sport Industry Association. And our aim is to be able to gather everybody to be able to come up with one industry voice in all of the policy debate. And as we were working on that, there is a clear challenge, challenges. I try to do my best to come with one, but I cannot resist to give a couple of them so that emerge. Clearly, the biggest challenge of the industry is to become circular. So it's how we can ensure the shift to a proper circular economy. That's still something that it's a big challenge. And for that, there is one main underlying challenge is indeed the access to all of the infrastructure and means and innovation, also a bit like Flora was mentioning, to become circular. So either those, they need to be accessed or they need to be even created. So that's virtually the big thing here. And I also have to mention still one of the big challenges is to become fully transparent, because this will be one of the enablers of the move towards transparency. So becoming circular, becoming transparent, and to have all of the means to be able to do those two changes.
Thanks so much. Yes, obviously from Good On You's point of view, we certainly agree with transparency as being a key issue that the industry needs to get to grips with. Dear audience, if you have challenges that you'd like us to address or you want to put on the record, please pop them in the session notes and I'll look out for them. Michael, please introduce yourself and your challenge.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Stanley-Jones. I'm the co-secretary of the United Nations Alliance for Sustainable Fashion, resident at United Nations Environment Program. I should say I'm the outgoing co-secretary. I've served for 2 years since the inauguration of the new interagency coordinating body of the United Nations. The big challenge, well, we have as our touchstone, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And it covers, of course, all 4 of the great crises that we face on this planet: the climate crisis, the pollution crisis, the nature crisis, biodiversity, and the inequality and equity crisis, which has come to the fore with COVID-19. I'll mention one just to be concrete, and that is that by 2030, the globe has to cut its carbon budget in half. We need to implement the Paris Agreement, signed in 2016, to become carbon neutral by 2050. And the way to get there is to take giant steps now that will set us up for success to contain the climate emergency. So cutting the carbon budget in half by 2030, that's the first step.
I just want to push you a little bit. The whole world needs to cut its carbon consumption. What's the challenge for fashion in addressing the need to what's stopping fashion reduce its carbon consumption? Where would you say that biggest challenges for the industry are?
Surely, prior to COVID, fashion was on course to increase its carbon budget, its carbon emissions equivalency by 60% by 2030. Absolutely headed in the wrong direction. But fortunately, many companies have signed up for the Climate Industry Charter, for the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, and they've adopted tools that can help them plan and then achieve those reductions and move towards carbon neutrality. The inequality question is, how do we disseminate those from the big players who have the budgets and are making the right moves to small and medium enterprises and startups, so they too can be part of the climate solution?
Thank you so much. Gal, let's turn to you. I think you might be on mute.
Hi, everybody. Gal. I'm a project manager at Algalife, where we produce fiber, biofiber, and dyes from algae. And our mission is to become a force for good for a future generation and be the ones creating a biotextile innovation. So one of the pressing challenges is that the supply chain is not engaged and not able to implement all the innovative aspects and technologies happening now in the industry. So one challenge that I would want to press is about enabling technologies coming in to really give an impact and change the supply chains today from linear to a destructive circular supply chain.
Hear you, Gordon.
These things, very sorry. Thank you, Baptiste. I was saying thank you, Gal, and we don't yet have any challenges or questions from the audience. I will throw in, from Good On You's point of view, an additional challenge, which is I think that over the last 5-10 years, we've seen the industry address some issues and make some progress in some areas, some of the environmental areas, the Charter on Climate Action, as Michael mentioned, the invention of new technologies and materials and processes, and some movement on circular economy and so forth. But an area where I think there's a lot of challenge is in relation to wages. So Michael did touch on equality, and there have been commitments from industry to address living wage issues, and at least at the top end of town, we don't see a lot of brands actually delivering on that. And I guess the challenge is that whereas we can come up with technical solutions and changes in production which can address some of our environmental issues, as tough as they can be, to the extent that production is 1 unit of labour equals 1 unit of output, wages really do challenge the business model. So there's some real innovation needed there to get brands on the page, in my opinion. Look, that lets us move on to the next area of our discussion, which is on progress to date. Some of these challenges are not new. I can't remember how long ago somebody pointed out that we had a climate change problem, a greenhouse gas emission problem. It was decades, not years. We've seen agitation around working conditions for a long time, on and off. It goes way back to slavery, but more recently, even in the Nike sweatshop campaigns of the 90s, first addressed some of the labour issues that happened as a result of offshoring production and globalisation. So these various environmental and labour issues have been on the agenda for some time. To what extent, I want to ask the panel, to what extent have we made progress, and to what extent are we stalled? So let's go around in the opposite order. What about you, Gal? Can you think about, make any comments on areas where there have been progress, and maybe one of those, and one area where there may be not much happening, in your opinion?
Definitely. I'll start with the working environments and the conditions. We have to change the conditions of our employees, and for that we need good materials. So if we start from the inside with good materials, we're also able to change the frontline communities working in the industry and provide healthy products. Also, with technical innovation comes really new progress and understanding of the full fashion industry, and the increased understanding is providing new ways to create, to treat and process in the supply chain. So in the end of the day, technical innovation will result in a low production of costs for businesses and greater value for consumers and the planet. So this is what we see fashion brands, companies, they're transforming their businesses models and improving the supply chain, and they're reducing overall by this environmental impact and improve social conditions. So the social conditions are a must right now. Yeah, thank you.
Maria, thanks so much for your question. That'll fit in very well in a little while, so I'll come back to it then. But in the meantime, Michael, what progress have we made?
Some progress, but I think we can't be over-impressed by what we've seen. Industry itself has developed tools for measuring Pulse of the Fashion Industry Report of Sustainable Apparel Coalition and Boston Group, for example. But those total scores are shockingly low. It's as if we've moved from an F grade to perhaps a D minus. We haven't transformed the industry, which is what we need to do to achieve the 2030 agenda. Fortunately, we have universal consensus on that agenda. All 193 member states have signed up. We've defined 17 goals and 169 targets. So companies need to wrap their programs of development, their operating systems around those targets, and to show how they have a plan and are implementing a plan to reach and achieve the 17 goals of the 2030 agenda.
Well, you're talking, of course, of the Sustainable Development Goals, as they are more commonly known, and the targets that are associated with those goals. Baptiste.
Thank you, Gordon. And I just want to complement something that Michael mentioned earlier when you asked him about one of the challenge regarding why the industry, for instance, didn't come across and wasn't able to solve the carbon footprint challenge a bit earlier. It's mainly because everybody needs to understand that our industry has an immense, it's extremely scattered. It's very divided. So there is a lot of actors. For many other industries, you take 5 big players, bam, the industry is there. You can move forward. Our industry, you can't. There is a huge number of people that are involved in it. So hence, the only time the industry was able to make progress is when they came together. When they came together, like Michael referenced, for instance, to create a tool to be able to measure environmental social performance, to create the Higg Index, to work within the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, to define, at least to agree, before wanting to improve anything, we need to agree where we're at. Michael referenced the creation of the SDG, for instance, also when the industry came together with a global fashion agenda to create the CEO agenda, that's the type of thing that they came together to be able to create. And also coming back to, for instance, now indeed, the industry has not been making enough progress regarding carbon emission, but they've been working hard on it. And for instance, the work they've been doing with the UNFCCC to set a target, define a path to be able to move there, those are clear, concrete improvements that are happening. But then also when the industry comes together, indeed, in all of the future political debate, and when they launch the Policy Hub, to have this unified voice. Because what we know also is that so far in the past, our industry, what we look at the progress of our industry, it's mainly the progress of 30 leaders or 40 leader tops. We forget all of the bottom half of the industry, which doesn't have the means of those organizations, which doesn't have necessarily the capacity. And for that, we know that we need the involvement of policymakers and others, and I will come back on that later, but that's clearly something that needs to happen to be able to move forward. So I think that we've seen progress, but we've seen progress on the upper front maybe, and less on the lower end of the spectrum.
Just for the benefit of people who may not be quite so involved in our agendas and acronyms, could you unpack what UNFCCC is and also talk a bit about the CEO agenda and where that came from?
Yes, sorry for that. So the CEO agenda has been created by the Global Fashion Agenda, which is a Copenhagen-based multi-stakeholder initiative, which is gathering leaders of the industry and other actors to be able to define for CEOs what are the key principles that they can practically implement in order to become more sustainable. Discussing topics as circularity, but also topic we touched upon about living wage and working condition, which are mentioned in those elements. So that's one of the work of the CEO agenda, which is available for all. And after the UNFCCC is the United Nations Climate Change, and I'm missing a C definition, but it's the body within the UN, which is indeed in charge of gathering for the fashion sector, who gathered everybody to be able to define a target and a path to reach this target regarding carbon emission.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you for the
Yes, no problem. Shivani, thank you for your comment. That will also fit in a moment. I'll come back to you. In the meantime, Flora, can you talk about, in general terms, the progress you think the industry's made and not made?
Yeah, definitely. So I think from a kind of innovation perspective, I think progress-wise, there are lots of exciting, often, which is a problem later down the line, we can discuss fragmented solutions that have been created over the last kind of 4 or 5 years, looking kind of at traceability tools, rating tools, things like that. But I think it's, and as you mentioned, Baptiste, earlier, it's the kind of bringing of these all together. And that's definitely what we hear as a challenge from lots of the brands we work with, is they're a bit overwhelmed. They're saying, like, what is the solution I should be using? And so making it easy and clear to brands what they should be doing. So I mean, I feel positive about the kind of consumer pressure that seems to be happening. I've spoken over the last 6 months to about 2,000 different fashion brands, and their consumers are pushing the change inside their organizations as well. So I feel positive that the movement is happening. I think in terms of challenges, and this goes back to Gal's point a bit earlier, is really bringing the supply chain key stakeholders into the conversation as key strategic partners. And I think, you know, for instance, I spent at the start of Supply Compass, I spent 2 to 3 years living in India on the ground inside factories, understanding what solutions that actually work for the kind of real implementation day to day across the value chain. And I think remembering, and I think this is this point we keep coming back to, is collaboration, but not just thinking about what's happening here in Europe, but thinking about on the ground, what does that mean to your organic cotton farm? What does that mean to your spinning unit in Tamil Nadu, for example? So building technology that works for all. So yeah, I would say that's a challenge. And then really urgency, the speed of change isn't happening fast enough. So yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Gordon.
Don't we? I want to stick with the question of progress and see if we can identify very precise innovations that have been effective or are looking really promising. Like what have you seen out there which will you know, help address some of these challenges, even if they only address one part of it? Let's pick somebody different to start with, like Michael.
Thank you, Gordon. Let me pick a chemicals example. In the processing of blue jeans, Levi Strauss had developed a closed loop system, so they would eliminate toxic discharges from the processing of fabric in their production. and they help disseminate that technology across their supply chain. Now, that's a single example. I think a broader example that we could look at is the progress made in accountability and transparency through the application of blockchain or product passporting, techniques that will soon enable consumers and producers to look at a quick readout of the impacts, social, environmental, across the value chain, by scanning a product or going online and downloading the details.
One of the interesting things about that last kind of solution, I think, is connecting the solution which tracks what's actually happened, such as a blockchain solution or something else, but connecting that with what should happen, or what does it mean? I mean, how does that, we did this, and this, but is that good? So I don't know if you've got anything to add to your observation of the strengths and weaknesses of those sorts of solutions, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of emphasis has been on how consumers might change their patterns of consumption, their behavior, if they had that information. But actually, I think probably more powerful will be how investors look at brands and their products to see, for example, if they're meeting the Paris Agreement climate targets to reduce carbon. And there you can have an actual measure of performance per product, perhaps. And then you can have that aligned with the target, so you can see how far you have to go, how far a company has to go to become carbon neutral.
So I think we are now touching on Marie Alexandra's question. So I'll just bring you to that if you can all see it. It's how can we distinguish between brands who are working towards a sustainable fashion and those which are not. And then she particularly goes on to talk about sustainable collections within big brands. But I think if we take the question more broadly, I think when you talk about we, you mean we as consumers rather than we as investors or employees, Maria. So let's assume that. What do you think, Michael? I know you steered us to investors, but what is the role of consumers and how do they tell which is better? And we'll come back to go around the circle on the progress in a minute, but let's explore this a bit more deeply.
We've seen this from the Business of Fashion Group's analysis of how consumers are reacting to COVID. Already there was a trend for increasing your conscious consumption, about consumers who are looking across their own values and looking for the reflection of that in the products they buy. But with COVID, people have started questioning more and more seriously their own patterns of consumption. And so this has strengthened what was already an existing trend. I think only about 10% of UK consumers in one survey were making conscious fashion choices or apparel choices, but that number could grow, could be 50%, could be 75%. And we see this especially in looking at younger consumers. Their values are different than the generation I represent. And that's fortunate, because with increasing consciousness and more value choice for consumers, we can see the pattern tipping the industry towards better practices.
And Baptiste, in thinking of consumers and investors and employees, how do those external stakeholders best make judgments about which brands are doing well and which brands are not, to take their engagement, to take into account when they're choosing whether to engage or not with that company?
Yes, so today it's a very complex thing. Today it's very complicated to do because we still lack this common way to be able to discuss about environmental and social performance at a brand level for such an organization. If you want to dive into what they are doing, either you still have to go to see all of their sustainability reports, or you can also have different tools that have done certain processing regarding their performance. That means you need to invest time. There is no straight go-to system to be able to do that. So in terms of innovation, I also have high hopes into system like the Good On You. I also have high hopes into system like indeed the HIG BRM tool and its future transparency work. And particularly when you have platforms such as Zalando that want to give that to all of their customers to be able to say, we'll be able at some point in time to be able to inform you regarding the performance of all of the brands of our platforms. So we still need to have today, so to come back on the question, is difficult because we need to have all of the actors. We need to have the tool in place. We need to have the retailers. We need to have everybody that will be able to give the information. It should not cost even a click to a consumer to be able to access this information. It should be there, available for them to be able to decide yes or no how they want to do that. So it will take time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I love that. It should not cost even a click. I mean, we've often said that it should be as easy to know a brand's sustainability performance as it is to know the price of their products.
Exactly.
So it should be right there with you. So, I mean, obviously, thank you for mentioning Good On You. Of course, we are one solution, Maria, that you might want to look into for helping you choose. Let's go back to the question of progress that we've made and particular innovations that are looking good. We've heard from Flora and Michael on that question. Gal, could you point to, obviously Algalife is one, but can you point to other innovations that you think are getting us in the right direction, moving us in the right direction?
Definitely. And I want to mention that I'm from the positive side, coming within the material community. I see the revolution already happening. It's moving really fast. It's maybe not 100% implemented, but it's here. Fashion brands and companies are exploring the alternatives to the standard materials, and key players are demanding suitable materials that deliver function, aesthetics, and durability. So from my point of view, it is happening right now. We see all kinds of solutions, if it's from pineapple or spider web or algae, but it is definitely something in the process and not 100% in a full scale, and that's what will make the difference. The being able to implement on a full scale to the market.
Fantastic, thank you, Baptiste. We haven't heard your take on the innovations that you would like to highlight that you think are being particularly effective.
Yes, thanks for that. So I think there is, we've talked about some technical solution. There is two that I just would like to outline is when you look at if you want to become circular, it's all of the work that happened to either rework or resell what's happening. So for instance, when you see change in business models, when you had organization or retailers or stores that were in the past only selling new product, virgin product, now which are selling second-hand product. I think this is a shift that we are seeing that will carry on accelerating, and either by dedicated platform or by organizations that now are doing the two. That's one thing. And the rework program. We have now many brands, many organizations that have take-back programs that are able to reprocess the goods to be able to resell them, such as H&M, Inditex, and others. So these are very good things and very promising steps that we can see moving forward even more. So I like also this take and this innovation on the business angle of things, which I hope will be accelerating even further.
Fantastic. And Flora, in terms of small brands, are there small brands which, you know, in general, what are small brands doing well and what do they find quite difficult?
Yeah, so just to kind of give a bit of context, we focus specifically on working with SMEs within the fashion and kind of homeware space, because we looked at the fashion industry, for example, in the UK, 99% of businesses, of fashion businesses, are actually SMEs, and we felt they were really uncatered for. And I think we've already touched on this a bit today, is that often those solutions are not necessarily accessible. They don't know where to start. So really what I believe in the SME space is that there's this entrepreneurial mindset, and inherently probably a little bit more experimental and innovative, because they can test stuff, you know, next week. There's no need to go through a years-long sales contract to get to the right key decision makers and stakeholders, and that really is necessary. And you get, you know, it's easier to get full team buy-in. You can get everyone on the call. So I think there's that, and I think really these businesses starting with social, environmental kind of considerations at their core, it's a lot harder to change the direction of a massive ship than a small boat at the start. You can set them off on the right journey, and you know, some of these SMEs 5-10 years from now really could be quite decent sized businesses. We're seeing some of them go through huge periods of growth in COVID when lots of big retailers were not doing so well. In terms of challenges, so I speak very regularly with all businesses within the kind of in our sales pipeline, and really what they struggle with is access to practical tools and the right solutions at the right cost. So a lot of times businesses will come to us and they say, we love this really cool tool, but it's going to cost us £1 million a year to implement, and we need a team of 10 people to manage that. That is just not possible, especially now as teams are cutting their workforces. I think also this point of access to right digestible information and expertise, it can be incredibly overwhelming to understand what you need to do and when. And I think it's this idea, which is, and technology can play a really good role in here, and this is what we're looking at implementing, is the kind of tooltips and digestible information at the right point in the product development life cycle. So when they're designing that product, that designer needs to know there. They don't want to know after that solution, after that product's been delivered, and they go, you know, that collection you made last year, now you need to improve this by that. It needs to be really tangible, actionable at the right time. I think the final two things I would say are challenges with SMEs is access to the right supply chains. At the moment, no one can leave their country to go and find new supply chains. So you need to know, this is where the digital marketplace of trusted suppliers is really important. And really right now, we're seeing a fair amount of SMEs thinking short term and fighting for survival rather than investing in the long term. And I think that we'll maybe get onto that. The impact of COVID has some positives for the sustainability conversation, but also some challenges. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we've talked a bit about consumers and investors and small brands and big brands, but Michael, I'd like to talk about the role of government now. We're still under this general heading of progress. What is government doing well, and what specific challenges are they facing in advancing the innovation agenda for fashion?
Governments have stepped up recently. I could say they were rather late in the game, or to put it more positively, industry and consumer advocacy has been in advance of government action. But that's now changed. For example, President Macron launched the Fashion Pact in 2019, engaging with the industry, not only in France, but the global value chain. Paris Good Fashion Initiative of the Paris City Hall, or their allied non-governmental organization is another example. We've also seen initiatives in Shanghai, and globally at the United Nations Environment Assembly in 2019, where the UN Alliance was launched. We had a kind of mini innovation summit there, and governments have been taking decisions to promote circular economy, but increasingly they see fashion, textiles, apparel, footwear, leather goods. They see it as, lying at the intersection of circular economy, as it touches so many lives in so many different ways. It's really cutting across those 3 or 4 crises that I mentioned at the opening of the hour. So what we expect, we will have 2 new reports from the United Nations Environment Program on the textile value chain and circularity coming out this year, including one at the end of the year that's directed to governments with recommendations on actions they can take to promote sustainable fashion.
That's fantastic. So people would be able to find those reports on the UNEP page when they're published, or somewhere else?
Yes, there, and also in the 10+ organizations that are part of the Alliance. So we're looking forward this month to the first of those 2 reports, and then the policy report at the end of the year.
Fantastic. And Baptiste, could you comment on your perspective on the progress of governments?
Yes, I think the progress of government is it's not enough to date. What we mean is that we talked earlier that the change and that what we need to see happening, it's massive, and that we're coming from an industry which is multiple faceted, which is massive, with a lot of SMEs inside, completely diverse. So first, we need the government to really come and play a role into creating a level playing field for all players and all actors there. So that's one of the key elements. We also know that when we think about, for instance, we didn't touch too much about the COVID crisis and the impact that it had. But for instance, like on the role of governments, that we've also made in the Policy Hub a big work with all of our members to be able to come up with a green recovery plan proposition to indeed say the type of change that can be happening. Very few of them in a quick way to be able to imagine, I mentioned earlier, to be able to really have all elements in place to be able to become really recycled. That will require a lot of investment, a lot of push, a lot of support from government, and it's something that we need to see happening to be able to move forward. There is a lot of reflection that can happen about how to incentivize consumers to be able to buy VAT reduction or others, to find the products which come from better, more sustainable ways, because either they have been recycled or others, to find them more attractive to the markets. There is many ways that can be implemented. Again, all available on our on the Policy Hub website also, but that's really thing that the governments can be doing to be able to push for that. But the key thing here is that we know and we agree that they need to be with us on that. We cannot do this transformation without them, but it's a big collaboration that we need to do all together. And finally, also, just finishing quickly on this point is that in the industry for a very long time, there was a tradition to just maybe look at a couple of big figures, big brands known of the industry, and try to see how those can be changed. But those people represent just peanuts of the overall industry, and they may be the one that, as also Michael was mentioning earlier, may have the biggest the biggest teams in terms of sustainability. So there is a clear here and understanding to be able to see if we want to change the industry again, we have to concentrate on the big bulk, how we can support the SME to be able to do the change, how we can support and help all of those people to be able to move forward. So I think there is a big role also for policymakers to understand this challenge and to also see those leaders as partners in this change moving forward.
And one particular government initiative that was proposed and actually didn't get up, I'd be quite interested in your view and also Flora's, seeing it came from her country, which is the measure recommended by a UK parliamentary committee to address the waste problem in fashion. That is the 1 penny tax, the proposal. Did Policy Hub have a view on that particular proposal?
Me first?
Oh, why not?
Oh, sorry. You want to go for that? Okay, so this is a conversation that is happening in terms of what, for instance, eco-modulation or other elements can be happening. Many people were thinking, like, for instance, there is still conversation happening. Lately also, for instance, at the Policy Hub, we had a lot of conversation with different recycling associations, and some of the people, and when we were talking about that, were mentioning that even though the ambition to go to 1 penny is indeed a very interesting one, but will that change anything? Will that really create enough means to be able to move forward? And will that actually drive the change that we want to see in consumers? One time when I was discussing with some people of a member state in Europe, they were mentioning that if you look at, for instance, what other industries are putting to be able to recycle waste compared to what the textile puts, there is orders of magnitude of difference. So we know that we can expect in the fashion industry to rethink a bit the contribution and to try to see to best create that so that ultimately it can really drive better recycling facility, better element that will be able to start this move towards a more circular model.
And Flora, do you have any perspective on that?
Well,
I'm only asking because you're from the same country.
No, it's a good question. I think for us, because of where we operate in the supply chain, we operate up until warehousing, and so really, actually, our focus from a waste circularity perspective is in India. So we focus on working with dead stock fabrics, but pre-consumer waste, and we've got some amazing supply chains set up which take factory waste, bring it back and reconstitute it into yarn, and then kind of within the same country. So for us, that's the kind of waste, that's where we focus on from a waste perspective rather than end consumer waste. So
yeah. We could probably talk about waste a lot more, but I think we should move on. I just want to stick with governments. One more aspect about governments, which, Gal, would be government support for technical innovation. Do you have a perspective in your country or across the globe about whether governments are doing enough to support technical innovation in fashion materials?
We're a global economy, as you know, so we see, I think I said it previous, that we see companies shifting because there's pressure from the government to, by 2030, by 2050, become more sustainable, to have supply chains that are circular and to bring benefits both to the environment and impact to society. So we see this, but it is slow, and we are part of this revolution, trying to push it from the inside of companies. So we definitely see the demand coming from the companies. So I'm more more seeing the demand coming from also SMEs, also big key companies wanting to do the change and trying to find the right solutions for them. Yes.
And Michael, how important do you think of it is it? How important do you think it is for governments to invest in innovative materials solutions as part of the agenda here?
I think the materiality question and Gal's points about alternatives to what we now see on the market are crucial. I had the chance to tour Donghui University in Shanghai's laboratory, looking at applications of nanotechnology to designing new fabrics. Fascinating stuff. Certainly the government is engaged and looks to replace, to revolutionize what's currently on the market. That university, formerly under its original name, which was East China Textile University, helped develop polyester in the 1940s and 50s. So I think it's very interesting that those who helped spawn what's currently on the market, I think about 65% of all textiles in apparel are made of polyester, which is carbon-based, which is part of the black economy. Drill, baby, drill. They're now looking and investing in natural fiber solutions of the kind that Gal had introduced and others. Even things we're very familiar with, like wool, married to nanotech, is producing new qualities in fabric that are revolutionary. So exciting developments there. I want to mention another way that governments can be engaged in promoting and financing small and medium enterprises. Very interesting suggestion from the International Trade Center Ethical Fashion Initiative's Fashion Hackathon last May came up, and that was to see if regional development banks might have a role in helping finance the creating a financial pipeline for SMEs to create buyers collectives or buyer cooperatives. The problem of a small business is they don't have the margin to afford the investments, as we heard before from Flora and Gal. But if they form collectives or cooperatives, they can get the purchasing power punch of a larger enterprise and get access to those new materials and start using them in their designs and their products. So that's just one very concrete suggestion of how government finance can help create pipelines that will enable SMEs to compete successfully and become sustainable.
Excellent suggestion. We've been mentioning a few non-traditional fabrics. I'll just call out Shivani's mention in the chat of Fairbricks, which uses molecular chemistry to turn CO2 into a PET-like subject material, I think, but you can see what she said in the chat. Okay, so we're about 2/3 of the way, a little bit more, 3/4 of the way through our time together. It's time, this being the Innovation Festival, to ask each of our panelists for a big idea. What is their big idea to address the problem at the subject of this session? So who hasn't gone first? I think you all have, except Michael, and Michael spoke last. So we won't go to Michael, we'll go to Baptiste. What is your big idea?
Oh, I don't know if what I would say it's called a big idea, but anyway, what I think is that it's very important in this change. I mentioned already that everybody needs to come together, but I think it's also first for everybody to be able to walk the talk themselves and to be able to implement to their organization or wherever they are doing the principle that they uphold to others. So for instance, it would be very interesting to see from a government perspective, if I just stick to this policy angle, how green public procurement can be much more enhanced and be really also a driver for change, and how also policymakers can show by themselves, for themselves also first, where they want also some others to be able to drive. So I will stick to that to enhance green public procurement.
Yeah, so walk the talk, enhance public procurement. And Flora, what is your big idea?
I feel there's a lot of pressure with the big idea here. I mean, I'm just going to bring it back to really this need for end-to-end digitalization of the supply chain, and that as norm, and that as a standardized kind of digitalization. So I think what the challenges are today is that every business has got their own kind of software stack that doesn't necessarily speak not just to each other, but also other businesses, other fashion brands in the industry. So that kind of ecosystem where people can share fabrics, collectively make change together, but also that system works also for the supply chain. So really, it's this digital core to the fashion industry. It's quite an offline, old school. In the sense of what tools it uses from a kind of product development process, lots of Excel, lots of email, and lots of PDFs in old versions. And I think, you know, if we need to start having real measurable data at the heart, it's got to be digital from the source. Otherwise, what's really challenging for businesses today is that it's really time consuming, as Baptiste said, really time consuming and really expensive to kind of retrospectively look at and measure. It needs to be just built in as standard so that you can have that one click for the consumer without. What was your one? I can't remember it now.
It shouldn't cost more than a click to find out.
I love that.
Not even a click away. Yeah.
Not even a click away.
And ultimately, it shouldn't be a huge financial investment for fashion brands either, because that will be the barrier to adoption. So really a kind of scalable, affordable digital core to the industry, like what's happened with AWS, with how you build most tech stacks today, and what's happened with Shopify on the front end. That needs to exist. So,
fantastic.
Yeah, big idea.
Yeah. Big idea. And Gal, your big idea is?
Yes. So as we talked earlier, the effects of the fashion are detrimental to the environment and also to us, human beings. So with technological innovation and better comprehension of the full life cycle, we understand the industry needs to change from within, focusing on the DNA of the material. And that's why, as a company, our values were to rethink differently about nature and produce fiber and dyes from an untapped resource of algae, which is a biodegradable and aquatic organism. So by offering both solutions, we're changing the industry from within, and also we're bringing not just an environmental impact, but also a impact that is good and healthy for our skin and body. So I really want to push it that the idea is to bring solutions with a core DNA that is good for the environment and good for our well-being and good for the planet. And that's the core that will help us, like we do, save 80% of the water consumption and prevent water pollution in our processes, along with other many health benefits. Yeah, thank you.
And finally, well, not finally, because I've got a big idea too. So second to last, Michael, what's your big idea?
Okay, we heard many times this afternoon, that there are great initiatives out there, but they're fragmented. They're not connected. The Fashion Pact, the CEO agenda, the climate industry, the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. Keep getting that one turned around. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat. Lots of great initiatives, but they are fragmented and they are not representative of the global community as a whole. They tend to be skewed, by the way, towards northern countries and ignore much of what is happening in the global south, where inequality and inequity are huge issues in the global value chain. And so we have great initiatives, but we are not connecting the dots. My big idea is that using the convening power of the United Nations, we bring together the stakeholders globally in a global multi-stakeholder dialogue where the information, the innovations, the interests, the values of the globe can flow together and develop a set of guidance, a recommendation to governments on action, fashion action to achieve the 2030 agenda. We already have consensus on where we want to be. We have the Paris Agreement. We have the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We know what the end point is. It's a question now of getting the knowledge in one pool so that we can take action collectively and achieve that agenda.
Thank you. And I'll step out of the chair and have a go. My big idea relates to one of those Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 12, that we have sustainable systems of consumption and production. And this idea is that consumers have a right to consume responsibly. We generally talk about consumers having the option or even the obligation to consume responsibly, but research suggests that more than half of consumers feel bad when they are not able to consume responsibly. Maybe 70, 80% of consumers say they would like to make more sustainable consumption choices. So if we have a right to consume responsibly and think of consumers as having a right rather than a duty, then the obligation falls on the suppliers of products and services and the producers of them to make that possible, to make it, as Baptiste said, less than a click away to have the information you need to make the responsible, sustainable choice. So that would be my big idea. Now, we have a question from the audience, which I think links to this idea of what are the innovations that we could propose. Audience, I'd love you to ask any questions of the panelists about their big idea. Whilst we're waiting for that, I'll just ask Nicholas's question, which is, what role can the social economy play in sustainable fashion? I'm not 100% sure exactly what social economy you mean precisely. It could have a number of meanings, but if panelists have a view on cooperatives. So Nicholas has answered my question. Thank you very much. What view do you, maybe Flora, do you have a view on that? And maybe Michael after that.
I mean, it's actually interesting can you hear me now?
No.
Cool. So, I mean, thinking a bit actually what Michael mentioned earlier about the kind of brand cooperatives of SMEs. This is exactly what we kind of have at the core of our organization. And it's really getting this kind of sharing of resources and not seeing your competitor as a competitor, and actually saying, you can both win, you can both do better, you can both do the right thing if you work together. So I think this mindset shift for brands, and also for it's something we talk often with our manufacturing partners and suppliers. It takes time to get comfortable saying, well, hold on a second, the last 20, 30 years these guys have been my competitor, but now you're asking me to work with them for common good. And I think that it takes time to shift that mindset. So I see huge potential in that, and having these kind of open platforms where someone's waste is another person's gold for their collection. So I really see it in terms of resources, expertise, and sharing of supply chains. This idea of people didn't used to want to be transparent about who they're producing with because it was their best kept secret. That is something of the past now. And so sharing, if you've built a fantastic supply chain, and opening it up for others to use as well. So yeah, that's probably my thought. I don't know if that fully answers the question. Oh, you're on mute.
My apologies. Michael, do you have anything to add to this idea of cooperatives in general and their role?
Yes, I think we've covered producer cooperatives, which is a great idea. But I would like to see more cooperative finance. That is everything from microfinance to institutional finance, like pension funds that will commit to investing in sustainability and use those 169 targets and those 17 sustainable development goals of the 2030 agenda to help steer finance in the directions that will give us the global results that we need for the planet. So how can that be done? Well, already we have some pretty outstanding statements. Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, famously said last year that if you're not carbon neutral by 2050, you will not be in business. And long before then, in fact, you'll be out of business if you're not headed in the right direction, because capital will dry up and that you will not be able to finance your operations. So it's really the banks, the private sector, and public institutions like the regional development banks that are committed to the 2030 agenda that can help steer the capital flows in ways that serve social good.
Fantastic. All right, we've only got a couple of minutes left. And I'm sort of wondering whether other panel members would like to comment on each other's big idea. For example, do you have a view on green procurement, which adds to or is a bit different to the one suggested by Baptiste? Do you have a view on digitalisation, which is different, or do you want to add to that idea? What about the Michael's suggestion of a global dialogue and Gal's suggestions about ensuring all materials have the environment and human health at their heart, and my idea about consumers having the right to responsible consumption? Does anybody want to put their hand up and dive in, comment on any of those ideas?
I've got
Flora.
I've just got a quick question for Gal in terms of, this is a question that we get a lot from our brands, is the kind of accessibility. I mean, we're really excited by new material innovations, and we work at the latest innovation that's commercially available. We try and get our hands on for our brands. Like, how far away do you think we are from these new materials really being, fed across the supply chain and being widespread?
Okay, so I think we're already definitely there. We can see startups like us already in piloting stage and stepping up with bigger scale and volumes. And it's really a question of who secured their supply chain for the next season and can deliver the next amount of tons. Like we did like a 21 ton for next season. So it's a real question about the scalability and the ability to implement the solution. And I don't want to talk for other businesses, but I know that that's our core, one of the core values, being able to scale globally, and also giving opportunities for frontline communities working cultivating our algae. So just a word on that. There is 300 million employees along the value chain of both with the end consumers. So we need to ensure a real decent working condition along the value chain. So I added a bit to that, but definitely I think we're there. I think it's a negotiation, and with a lot of positivity, I think we are there. And I think we need to work harder. And I think although we're in a strange kind of times, this is the time to stop and talk and discuss and implement better for the future together. Thank you.
We don't hear you, Gordon.
I'm saying, Baptiste, I thought you were saying no, I don't want to say anything, which I was surprised at. Baptiste, Michael, do you have any comments or questions on the matters that have been raised by other panelists?
No, I just want to second what Flora mentioned regarding digitization. So to say that we know that definitely something that this big idea is definitely a one that to double click on. This one can be clicked multiple times. And we can definitely go down this path to really to explore that further. We know that in the way to be able to indeed communicate, engage with consumer, this will be key. In the way for brands to be able to gather data, digitization about the information all across the supply chain will be key. And that will also call for new changes that will need to be there about new expertise in brands and organization to be able to collect, process this data, new support to be able to do that. And definitely something to embrace as a big idea to indeed be able to move towards a much more sustainable industry moving forward.
And I'd like to add to that too. I mean, Good On You is a platform for bringing together data about brand performance and simplifying that down into a way that consumers can use or that retailers can use to communicate with consumers. And we're already working with a number of partners in the spirit of collaboration to get their data sucked into the Good On You methodology. We've announced a partnership with Fashion Transparency Index, and we're talking to a couple of other players, one of whom's been mentioned today, about how we could work together. And the more we can digitize the supply chain, the more we can have things like the blockchain solutions that Michael was talking, and we can bring it together into a simple, easy to use tool for consumers to find the more sustainable brands. That's part of the pressure on industry and even government to do better. Michael, last chance.
Yeah, just, in my imagination, the global multi-stakeholder dialogue for fashion action is not going to happen in a palace behind closed doors and smoky rooms. Those days are over. We now have digital government, we have e-commerce, and we have e-communication platforms like this one that can open this up. We've seen this before. When we developed the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 SDG and the 169 targets, that was done with 3 million voices globally aggregated through an inclusive process. We can even do better now. Fashion is ubiquitous, it's universal, everyone has a stake in it, everyone loves to wear clothes. That's just the fact of life. So it's the potential for social engagement, for public participation, for inclusive dialogue is there. We can use these platforms and we can build one UN voice that aggregates the communities around the world on this topic. Thanks.
That's fantastic. I think we've hit time. We need to wrap up. It's already, I don't even know if we're still broadcasting, but thank you very much to each of the four of you for your contributions. And thank you very much to the people who've been attending to listen to the session, watch the session. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope we can all move forward with the kind of agenda that we've been talking about today. So thank you. Good night, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.